So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever you are. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live session on contingency planning with predictive analytics. My name is Pras Chatterjee. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing at SAP, and I'm pleased to announce and have my friend here, Rob Kugel from Ventana. Rob, please introduce.
Oh, thanks, Pras. I'm Rob Kugel, and I run the Office of Finance and Business Practice at Ventana Research, where I joined a short 18 years ago. And for 18 years, business planning has been at the center of my research agenda.
Fantastic. So, Rob, the reason we're here is you wrote a white paper, Contingency Planning with Predictive Analytics. And that white paper gave some great insights into, what's happening for FP&A when it comes to predictive analytics and such. And with the pandemic over the last year, FP&A is clearly in a big focus for organizations of all sizes. Can you give me some insights into, how is uncertainty of the past year full of FP&A?
Well, I think, like in any difficult business situation, companies last year discovered that they needed answers fast. And so they needed to be able to explore what to do next with very, very short planning cycles, being able to get detailed answers to questions right away and, no more of the I'll get back to you with that. So unlike a lot of general declines in business where, we should have been able to do this, but now we can't really afford to invest because business is terrible. The pandemic had an interesting impact in that it crushed some parts of the economy and left a bunch of other ones just unaffected. And the ones that were unaffected, some of them decided that now was the time to do something. And so they've embarked on, a remaking of the FP&A function. The mission isn't really different or all that different, but it's now gotten very serious about being able to do that kind of contingency planning with short planning cycles, to be able to have an interactive dialogue, perhaps even about, what if we tried this? What would happen? What do you see with that? And that's, I think, one of the things that's changed in the past year for some companies.
Okay, excellent. And I remember my days back in FP&A. It was a very scheduled way of planning. Often we did August based on and we did budget updates every so often, and then forecasts once a month and things like that. Do you think the process will now change? This is a catalyst for FP&A, not just new technology, but change the process and insights they bring to organizations?
Again, for some companies, I think definitely. One of the nice things about being able to do that kind of planning and budgeting is that it really streamlines the process when you're just doing things on a regular schedule. So people are spending less time doing that same old stuff. But when you need to focus in on a part of the business where you see an opportunity, where something comes up, where there's a challenge in that part of the business, you can very rapidly do that kind of unscheduled ad hoc planning and see the consequences, not just on that little part of the business, but looking at the business as a whole.
Oh, excellent. So, Rob, we know that FP&A is trained in, many of them start in accounting, many of them start in finance, but they all know how to look at budget, balance sheets, understand cash flow. What are some of the soft skills and maybe even the technical skills FP&A needs to adopt in this new world, new economy to service their business and business partners?
I think that there needs to be a well advertised shift in the stated mission of FP&A. If it isn't already there, then it should be there, that the group's mission is to make planning and budgeting a much faster and easier process for the people who are doing the planning and budgeting. That it's not some corporate requirement, and and here you go, fill in this spreadsheet. You really need to have an approach to how do you collect the information, how do you put it together, how do you interact, that takes a lot of the burden off of the people in operational roles, to just make it faster and easier for them. So if you think about your average budget owner, they get a spreadsheet, and now they have to put in some dollar or euro or some currency amount in these rows and columns, and maybe they're going to look at last year and they're figuring out, how do I update that? And it's an anxiety ridden thing that's not really aligned with the way they think, because typically people in operational roles don't think about money, they think about things. And so what would be extremely helpful is if FP&A were to create planning and budgeting models that focus simultaneously on things like headcount, units produced, units consumed, labor hours required, cartons required, the whole thing. But focusing on the things, and let the people who are doing the planning fill in those quantities, and have the model generate the budget, the financial plan out of that process. So if you think about a very simple example, might be some business unit where really all they have is headcount and corporate allocations. So how about if they just filled in a grid with people in whatever positions, and it already is populated with whoever you got hired in that business unit, and then you add headcount, over 5 or 6 quarters, and then that's it. You're just filling in these little numbers, and then poof, because you've created a model that takes HR data for what people are actually getting paid, what the expected cost of employment is going to be, including benefits, etc. It just spits out a headcount budget from that, and that is minutes to update, either on a monthly basis or whenever you have to. You have to make an adjustment. Well, just move that person here, or I'll take that position out because we no longer need it. Whatever. But it's you're setting up a planning and budgeting model that simplifies the process for that operational person who has to submit a plan and budget.
That I think you highlight some of this in your white paper as well. But the reality is that information exists everywhere and everybody plans. Knowing that information exists everywhere and everybody plans, and there's data being created, count data, there's IT purchases and acquisitions, there's procurement information, there's sales information, there's compensation. There's so much information for finance to work with, and then come bring this all together. And what strategy can they use to bring this all together with regards to budgets, forecasts, plans, scenario analysis, modeling, or whatnot?
Well, data is the raw material of planning and budgeting. So one of the reasons I started to use the term integrated business planning back in 2007, 2008, was to describe a way of organizing the technology and data part of this, so that you're everybody's working with a common data set, working on a common software platform that allows them to plan and budget just the way that makes sense for them, but also allows all of that data to be shared around very easily. It allows you to consolidate plans pretty much instantly, because it's all taking place in a single data structure. Along with that, I've started talking about something called, sort of jokingly call it a data aggregation device, or a DAD. And sometimes I call it a data pantry, because it's a way in which you now organize all of that information you're talking about, so that it's in a single accessible data pantry, that is easily accessed by people who are doing the planning, and everybody's working from a common set of data. And there's what we like to call a semantic layer, so everybody knows what that thing is. If we say it's sales, we mean it's net sales. If we say it's this particular nomenclature that we have for a product component, everybody knows that that's what that is. And it's not general purpose. So everybody, has easy access to the data, and nobody is spending an awful lot of time pulling that information together, either individually or, in the FP&A organization, kind of, doing a daily, monthly, weekly, huge download and swooshing everything together and spending hours doing that. We now have, APIs or RPA, robotic process automation, to be able to handle all of that data movement, do all of the extraction, transformation, loading into a single data store that everybody who's doing the planning can now access. So that's one approach to dealing with that. There's data everywhere, and how are we going to use it?
Actually, around us, and even pertaining to finance, is that of predictive analytics, machine learning, AI, and the whole realm. And we know that these things, these tools and solutions out there are starting to be adopted by finance. Now, I know finance loves their spreadsheets, they love their details, they love building their budgets from bottom up. But learning to move on from this is something that some of the benefits for these modern AI, machine predictive analytics tools for FP&A, so they can better service their business partners.
Braz, you broke up. I think we have a bandwidth issue on your end. Could you repeat that so I can? It got kind of cut off there.
Yeah. How can predictive analytics and machine learning and AI benefit finance?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me see. Do we have another hour no, I guess not. It's a pretty vast topic. One of the ways that I think predictive analytics and AI can be put to use in a planning and budgeting context, first of all, is very simply using machine learning to be able to discern relationships, significant relationships within large data sets. And that would include not just the financial information, but also operational information and external data, such as GDP or industry statistics, or any sort of thing that influence supply and demand in the business, so that you're able to construct useful driver-based models based upon the data that's there, and that you can come up with relevant, most consequential things that happen in business that affect supply, demand, costs, things that are really very concerning to people running the business. So that's a starting point. The wonderful thing about predictive analytics is that it instead of just doing naive extrapolation, predictive analytics is designed to be able to come up with, well, what really are the factors that drive business outcomes, and therefore, based on what we're looking at now, we fill in a bunch of assumptions, and then it generates a result from that. So you've got a much more nuanced forecast. I mean, just something really as dumb as, when do Easter and Thanksgiving take place? When is Ramadan? When is the Lunar New Year? All of those things will affect, upstream, downstream, how the business is going to behave. So simply having those calendar events reflected in however you're modeling it will make the result probably more accurate, because it's taking into effect those really easy variables that actually we observe year after year have an impact. Now, the other thing, and it's a little more subtle about predictive analytics, is that we all know that predictions are always wrong. They're never right. What you can do with that, though, is the question of how wrong is it going to be. And because you're looking at this as a time series, you can, at a fairly early date, be able to figure out that, this prediction, not only is it not working out, it's not working out, more than it should. So that you've got a confidence band, if you will, around whatever that prediction is. And so if it's exceeded either up or down, there's an alert that says, this isn't quite working out. So that instead of waiting until, halfway into the next month to do something about it, you can be doing something about it while the month is going on, or the week, depending on, what your business is and how easily you can create, those kinds of predictions that are relevant. So there's a lot that can be done with that. This is not we're just going to flip a switch and we'll have our perfect model. It ain't going to happen ever, because, all models are wrong. Some are useful. And the use here is to be able to react very quickly, much faster than you could, when things begin to get out of kilter, either overall or down into, some of the smaller parts of the business. And let me get back to a point that you raised earlier, which is what's changed. Well, this is when you don't want to have to do things on a schedule. You want to ad hoc deal with an issue that's come up with some sort of potential interventions, be able to assess what does the impact look like if we do this, that, or the other, and then make a decision based on that's intelligent, that's based upon facts that we have today that we didn't have when we originally set up this plan.
Ask Rob. There's a question from the audience, and it actually ties into my next question. In your white paper, you indicated that 24% of companies right now are using analytics. How do we get this to 100%? And also, how do you convince finance and operations from the audience to move away from their spreadsheets to more predictive data concepts?
I think, how do you do it? Well, I think the 24% that are doing this, that we're beginning to see more and more companies going, I think that would work here. Why don't we do that? There's a lot of planning that's just plain habit. And unfortunately, it's all tied to the way things used to be, because you had a lot of constraints on what you could possibly do in terms of planning and budgeting. So I think, that one of the, big enabling factors in the last real decade has been, the technology's just gotten better and better. Still needs a ways to go, but just better and better and easier, to be able to use predictive analytics more usefully. And I think as some companies demonstrate that they're getting results doing this, that then leads to adoption by other companies. It's kind of how technology diffuses through the finance organization, which is slowly, but it does happen. And I think that as operational, as because what I've been describing here in the way of planning and budgeting, it really serves the needs of the leadership team, of the CEO and all the functional leaders in the company. but I don't think they're aware that that option exists and that it's actually workable. I think that FP&A leads who want to really build a career will grab this as an opportunity, maybe starting on a small scale and then building on it, but show that they're able to contribute strategically to the operations of a company by going back to an earlier point I made. You got to make planning and budgeting easier for the budget owner. You need to be able to answer questions right away. Predictive analytics is one of those skills, one of those capabilities that allows you to do that. There's a lot of other stuff to it, but it's another one of those enabling technologies that I think can advance people's careers.
Excellent. I mean, it sounds a lot like the late 90s or mid 90s when people someone had an OLAP database to do their plans. Everybody had an OLAP database eventually. So, we'll get there based on that. So just in terms of an overall FP&A strategy for organizations and even for the individual, what can they do to become more agile, resilient, and again, at the enterprise and organizational and even at the individual level so that they can be, the next generation business partner?
Yeah, and I think it is always a people, process, information, and technology set of interventions that are unique to the circumstances of the individual. Fine, but the first thing you need to do is ditch the spreadsheet. Not totally. Spreadsheets are absolutely essential for an enormous amount of things that you do in finance and accounting. They're unequaled for prototyping. So before you go to build a model in some piece of software, you build it in a spreadsheet, and then you figure out what that is, and you play with data in a spreadsheet before you then put it into a bit of software, some application. So that there is a role for spreadsheets, and spreadsheets are great for those roles, but they do not work for any kind of repetitive, collaborative, enterprise-wide process, specifically planning and budgeting. It's easy to set up financial models and then kind of pull out a budget from it for you, but not for the rest of the organization, and not in a way that makes the process a really valuable business tool. It's by having a much more advanced tool that get over the disadvantages of spreadsheets to be able to make planning cycles a whole lot shorter. If you're consolidating a mass of spreadsheets, I'll get back to you, because you don't have the ability to consolidate that information at all quickly, and you're going to have to fix a bunch of stuff along the way. When you build some of these spreadsheet models, when you're doing an integrated income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, and you make some changes to that under any one of those underlying models, a lot of times, because I've done this myself, kablooey, the thing falls apart and you have to debug it and figure out the reason why you have software is because operationally it just works a whole lot faster, and fast is the critical element now in being able to do contingency planning, to be able to plan at ad hoc, to be able to zero in on a certain part of the business that needs attention and just deal with that, and then see what the impact is going forward. All of those things, you can't do it in a spreadsheet. And the other thing I'll tell you about a spreadsheet is the two-dimensional grid. And you can tease it to do 3 dimensions, by using pivot tables and things like that. Maybe 4. Guys have done all kinds of clever things with this stuff. But the reality is that if you want to do unit times rate kind of budget where you've got things and money, no, it's not going to work in a spreadsheet. What you really need to have is a data structure, a modeling structure, a reporting structure that allows you to work in multiple dimensions like products, customers, geographies, those time, currency, and just sort of instantly change some things and then have it propagate accurately and effortlessly across the entire business model. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, Rob, just another great insight into that. And one other question I want, you've talked about spreadsheets obviously in the two-dimensional grid, maybe three-dimensional, maybe some arrays in there, H lookups, V lookups, bring it all together. Uh, do you think it's time for finance to embrace analytical data so they can share that information, and so it's not just something they hold to themselves, but they expand beyond their CFO base?
Yes, and I would again go back to you need to have the operational data, not just the financial data. The financial data is absolutely essential, so that it is that much more relevant to people in operational roles. Because one of the things is okay, there's a whole lot of stuff that happens behind those numbers, and as an operating guy, I don't know what those are. Why did that variance take place? What were the underlying factors? Well, if all I have is financial numbers, then I can tell you financially what happened, but it doesn't necessarily explain what was going on, out there on the factory floor, in the sales pipeline, what the partners were doing. I mean, you don't have any contextual data to explain that stuff, and therefore my ability as an operating manager to do something is based on my guesswork as to what those numbers actually mean. And that it'd be a whole lot easier if I knew exactly what the operational numbers were and didn't have to guess it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rob. This has been a fantastic and great discussion. I hope to do this again with you at some point, and I hope the next time we do this, we never hear those 5 words either. Let's have 100% adoption, or maybe 75% of adoption of predictive analytics, machine learning, and AI to help the finance function work that much better. Thank you, Rob, for some great insight, for joining us on LinkedIn Live, and look to do this again very soon with everyone.
Looking forward to it. Hope we do it soon. See you.
Great. Thanks so much, guys.